time to start on who is probably my favorite character from Wano, Hiyori. So she is going to be divided into 3 videos. This first one is going to be covering from her birth all the way up until she essentially becomes Komurasaki, where she fully takes on that role. And then the second video is going to be essentially her time as Komurasaki all the way up until the Battle of Onigashima. And then the last one is going to be the Battle of Onigashima and anything afterwards. Now, to be fair, Hiyori is not as involved in the Battle of Onigashima as some of the other characters are, but she still is going to get that video. So, Kozuki Hiyori, daughter of Kozuki Oden and Kozuki Toki, younger sister of Kozuki Momonosuke, at least physically, at this point in time, chronologically and physically. She is also, of course, known as the beautiful Oiran Komurasaki, who is the highest ranked Oiran in Wano, and of course considered the most beautiful woman in Wano, possibly rivaling Boa Hancock and Shirahoshi as the most beautiful woman in the world. Side note, at my job, we have online orders. Sometimes I have to fill those orders, and they give us a person's name. Dude's name, who I had to fill out the other night, Hancock. That's his last name. No joke. Yeah, that was just funny. I'm just like, wait a second. This guy's last name is Hancock. Ha ha. So, as I said, she is also Komurasaki. That will be gone over as well. And she does this as a way to hide who she is. Obviously. And in regards to the 2 names that she goes by, Hiyori, her proper name, means weather, as in, like, you know, the weather outside, which today is blisteringly hot, at least on the day of recording. And then Komurasaki translates as small purple, and in the Japanese name, it's named for the purple beauty berry. I think it also is a reference to chrysanthemums, if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong about that. I don't remember. Like, Oda likes to name women after birds and flowers, so sure. You get that. Hiyori is physically 26 years old, and she currently is now essentially kind of like, since Momonosuke has no children, I guess she is technically the heir to Wano should something happen to Momonosuke. But God forbid, hopefully that doesn't happen. And she, of course, has Toko as her ward, essentially, as the one that she cares for. And I'll be going over those more in the second and the third videos, but just kind of setting it up here. And, of course, she did used to have a weapon. She used to have Enma as the sword bequeathed to her by her father, but she, of course, gave said sword to Zoro in exchange for Shusui, to have the national treasure of Wano returned to its resting place. Again, I'll be going over that a bit more in the second video, but it's kind of applicable here. So she did used to have a weapon. I think a lot of us actually kind of wanted to see Hiyori and Momonosuke both use Oden's swords, which could still very well happen. Momonosuke is learning how to use Ame no Habakiri at this point in time, and we've never seen Hiyori use any type of sword or a dagger or anything like that. She uses the Sea Prism Stone nail against Orochi later on during Onigashima, but that's a little bit different. Her weapon is her beauty. She very much uses her beauty as a weapon and as her main, defense mechanism. Her beauty and her charm and her talents, which I will discuss more when I get to Komurasaki. But going into Hiyori's life, so she was born 26 years ago to, of course, Kozuki Oden and Kozuki Toki while they were sailing on Whitebeard's ship, the Moby Dick, during Oden's time as one of Whitebeard's division commanders, as a second division commander. And she was born there. Much celebration was had. She's 2 years younger than Momonosuke, a little bit, by a bit. And assumedly Momonosuke was happy to have a little sister. The bits that we see interacting of them are that they very much enjoy being around each other. Not long after Hiyori was born is when there is the, skirmish, whatever, between the Roger pirates and the Whitebeard pirates on the whatever island it was. Where, Roger and Whitebeard clash, and we're like, they have a bunch of the different fights and everything that lasts for like 3 days. My headcanon in this is that Toki is just like sitting on the ship on like the Moby Dick with like Momonosuke and Hiyori, because like Hiyori would have been like a newborn at this point in time. Like, it is not long after she's born that they run into the Roger pirates. But like, so she's like probably just like watching her children drinking tea or whatever on the deck of the Moby Dick, and like anytime some of the fighting gets a little too close, they're like, "Oh, look, children, they're fighting." It's like, look, there's your father. He's fighting a guy with 2 axes. I'm just sitting there watching this. Roger would have been effing pissed if any of his crew attacked like Toki and 2 innocent children. He would have been pissed if that had happened, and of course Whitebeard would have been pissed as well. So they're pretty safe, and like Whitebeard knows Roger isn't just gonna attack the small children, the innocent woman on the ship with the 2 small children. Whitebeard knows this enough. So it's just like, assumedly they were just kind of there in the background. We don't really see them during the battle, but that's just my headcanon as to what was going on. Although after the battle, we do get the moment where, of course, Roger is talking with Odin and Whitebeard, and we get the whole reveal that, Roger is trying to find his way to where the 4 poneglyphs meet, so they need to get someone who can translate the poneglyphs, which is where Odin comes in. So it's the moment of, can I rent your Odin, essentially, to Whitebeard? And of course, Odin agrees, Whitebeard begrudgingly agrees, and then Odin, along with his with Toki and the children, and Inarashi and Nekomamushi, then end up boarding the Oro Jackson and essentially kind of temporarily joining the Roger pirates. And, we see Roger and Rayleigh just like fawning over the 2 little kids, and I think it's Roger's the one that's holding Hiyori, and Rayleigh's the one holding Momonosuke, and it's just like, it's been a while since I've held a baby in my hands and everything like that, referencing Shanks, who's in the background, Shanks and Buggy in the background, who are getting jealous of the small children. It's like, don't worry, you 2 are going to get very well acquainted with them as well. I do, just, like, I don't know who's, like, if someone's ever going to ask Oda this, or if it's ever going to be brought up in the actual story, would Buggy have showed up at Wano to try to help Momonosuke and Hiyori? Would he have shown up had they come and asked him for help? Part of me wants to say yes, because he knew them. He knew Inarashi and Nekomamushi. He knew Odin. He knew Toki. Part of me wants to say yes. Part of me is also like, it depends on how much of a coward he has to be that day. But so I just kind of wonder about that, because then it's, then the Kozuki family then travel with the Roger pirates for several months at this point in time. Odin actually kind of stays with them a year, but they're, traveling through. They end up going to Skypiea and down to Fishman Island and a bunch of these other places, of finding the different poneglyphs and reading them and learning about the different locations of the other ones, and learning about the different locations of just the various weapons and everything else like that. Again, Hiyori's a baby at this point in time. She doesn't really remember any of this. But eventually, Toki gets sick. So what ends up happening is they make the decision of, okay, we're going to go to Wano, and we're going to drop Toki, the children, and Inarashi and Nekomamushi off at Wano so she can recover there. So this is mostly at the behest of Toki, who's like, no, you must keep going. You have to keep going, Odin. You have to continue on this mission that you have set for yourself. Which he does. They go to Wano, they drop her off. Odin runs really quick and goes and reads like the poneglyph that's hidden underneath the flower capital at the bottom of Mount Fuji and everything. Runs there, reads that, comes back. They all head off after he's introduced some of the scabbards to his. This is my wife Toki. This is my son Momonosuke and my daughter Hiyori. My wife's sick. Please take care of her. I'm also returning Inarashi and Nekamamushi. Sorry, Kiku. Izo isn't here. He's still with the Whitebeard pirates. They can fill you in. I gotta go. It's essentially what happened. They head off. Toki and the children stay in Wano. Toki gets nursed back to health. Headcanon, Suduru is the one who does it because I don't know if I trust any of the other guys with like medical knowledge, but my headcanon is that it's Suduru that nurses her back to health essentially. And helps like take care of the kids to a degree. And of course, the scabbards are learning about what's been going on over the past, so many years that Odin's been gone from Toki and from Inarashi and Nekamamushi. And then eventually, about 6 months later or so, is when Odin returns. And he is happily reunited with his wife and children. We have those moments there. Again, Hiyori is like a year old at this point in time, maybe a year and a half, give or take, up and toddling around. So there's a bit there, and then of course we have Odin finds out about what Orochi has been up to, and eventually it ends up resulting in him having to dance naked in the flower capital for once a week for 5 years, which he does, and he kind of wonders if Toki and the children would ever leave him because of him, being a disgrace in this regard. Of course, the children don't care. He's their father. They just think he's funny, and they don't fully understand what's going on. And then, of course, Toki's just like, no, you probably have a very valid reason as to why you're doing this. She says that she, writes letters or whatever. I married an idiot. But he's a sweet, good-hearted idiot, so... whatever you want to go with there. He's a sweet himbo. And Hiyori is growing up during this time frame. Momonosuke is as well over these next 5 years. Hiyori is, of course, taking up interest in the, I think it's the biwa is the name of the instrument that she ends up playing. That she ends up mastering. She becomes very adept at playing it even as a child. And there's a moment even when like Odin is talking to her while she's playing, and he's like, would you please remember to play that song for me at my funeral, which just makes her cry. Which just was like, Daddy, no! It just starts crying, and then Momonosuke scolds Odin for making Hiyori cry by asking a stupid question like that, and then Odin tries to appease Hiyori. And of course the song that she is playing is the Moon Princess song. And that, of course, comes back later because that's also, like, Orochi's favorite song and why she continually wears the mask whenever she plays it, because she's crying the entire time, which, of course, I will bring up later in both videos, both of the other two videos for her, probably. And so we have that. And, like, generally, Hiyori and Momonosuke, like... yes, their father is the daimyo of the Kuri region, and everything like that, but given everything, he's also looked down upon by the people for supposedly being a disgrace because of what he's doing. He left, and even though he's returned, he's now just playing a fool in the flower capital and everything, unknowing that he's doing it to protect them. So we have that. And then, they adore their father and their mother and everything, and they love being around the other scabbards. And of course, Momonosuke's training with his sword, his swordsmanship. And then, of course, Hiyori is, of course, training with her biwa and everything else like that. Learning how to be like a proper young lady from her mother. Eventually, we get to 20 years ago. And of course, 20 years ago is when, of course, the huge battle happens between Odin and the scabbards and the beast pirates, because of the fact that Hirogoro was captured, his men were killed, and his wife was killed. So Odin, that's like the last straw for Odin. So he and the scabbards head off to go fight the beast pirates. During this time frame, Hiyori, Momonosuke, and Toki stay in Kuri Castle, and Shimosuke Yasuye shows up and with his men to protect them during this time frame. Unfortunately, as we all know, Odin and the Scabbard lose because of trickery. Unwillingly on the part of Kaido. Kaido actually wanted a fair fight against Odin and his Scabbards, or a semi-fair fight against Odin and his Scabbards. I mean, in the fact that he took he was told, via Kanjuro, via Orochi, that they were on their way to go fight him. Yes, he still showed up to give them a semi-fair fight, as opposed to fighting in his castle that he just finished building. He's like, okay, well, we'll fight here in this area of the of the Udon region, because I think it was a rather abandoned area of the region, or at least semi-abandoned. And they fought there. But even on those terms, Kaido still wanted to fight Odin fairly, one-on-one or so. Unfortunately, because of Higurashi, that did not happen, which Kaido did not like. No. Kaido did not like that at all. So eventually what of course ends up happening is, Odin and the Scabbards are defeated and captured, and they are set for execution to be boiled alive. Toki, trying to figure out what she needs to do in order to protect her children, she's very concerned about both of her children. She's not quite sure what to do, so she's reading Odin's journal to try to figure out, okay, what's coming. She also goes to Odin and gets his swords, and then hides them somewhere, assumedly in the Enma Shrine. She hides them, and then eventually they're found. But they hide the swords and everything. And we kind of see her having trying to have one last quiet evening with the children while everything is happening in the Flower Capital. And then, of course, what ends up happening is this is when Momonosuke, or not Momonosuke, this is, of course, Odin is boiled, saves the Scabbards, and then ends up, sacrificing himself. Several of them get to the Kuri region where the castle is already being attacked. Kaido has already shown up at the castle and is threatening Momonosuke, has Momonosuke hanging over the side of the balcony, and is threatening to drop him, in that regard. Doesn't end up doing so. I go over this more in Momonosuke's video, because he doesn't see Momonosuke as a threat at that point in time, because Momonosuke is too much of a coward at that point in time, and is refusing to admit that is too scared to admit that he's, Odin's son. And we don't know actually how much Odin, or how much Kaido would look at Hiyori as a threat. Maybe not that much. Not because he has anything against women, because we see all of the powerhouse women that were on Rox's crew. We see Stussy, we see Big Mom, we see Gloriosa, possibly other ones that are on the crew. Even Kaido ends up having several heavy hitters that are women in the regards to Black Maria and Ulti and such. But it's not quite the same, so I don't know exactly. He doesn't end up really interacting. I don't think Kaido ever interacts with Hiyori, as far as we're aware, to the best of my knowledge. There's no depictions of it in the manga or in the anime where they interact directly. But what ends up happening is, of course, Kaido's okay, and he flies off, and the castle's already burning, so he's assuming they're going to die. The Scabbards show up, which is, of course, Kinemon, Kanjuro, Raizo, Kawamatsu, and Kiku show up. They're the ones who made it to the castle. They get inside, everything is burning, Toki's holding the children, and she explains to them the plan. Okay, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to use my power to send Momonosuke and 4 of you into the future by 20 years, because that's when this prophecy is supposed to come true, or that's when this stuff is set, according to what we found in the, she doesn't explain why, but it's what she found in Odin's journal. and it's like, okay, I'm going to send you into the future 20 years as a safe, as like, a fail safe. Hiyori is going to stay here in this time frame, grow up normally, and be protected by Kawamatsu. And, as like, one this way, one that way. And, Hiyori is, to be fair, Hiyori and Momonosuke are both very terrified out of their minds during this time frame, and probably both being very mentally scarred. Their father just died. Their home is burning down. Their mother is going to go die soon, although they're not quite aware of that yet. And they are going to be separated from Momonosuke's perspective for several months, and for Hiyori's perspective, 20 years before she sees her brother and these 4 scabbards again. She's technically never going to see Kanjuro again. He dies before she really interacts with him again. But you get the idea. Which is a good thing in all honesty. And so that's what's done. Toki uses her powers to send Momonosuke and those 4 into the future. She then gives Hiyori to Kawamatsu. And the way that he escapes they escape the burning castle is he dives into the moat and is able to escape, having Hiyori hold her breath. Since he's a fishman, he can get out of there much faster, swim faster and get out of there faster. And then he takes her and they go off into the forest, into the woods, for him to, like, this to abandoned shack or whatever, for him to take care of her. And over the course of the next 7 years, essentially what ends up happening is, Hiyori is exceedingly sad and upset, of course, about her, her father is dead. They don't know where some of the other scabbards are. Her brother and the others got sent into the future. She has no idea if she's ever going to see them again. Her mother is dead because they probably would have heard about Toki's prophecy and everything. Even, wherever they were hiding, they probably would have gotten information about that. And news that Toki was dead. And then all she has left is Kawamatsu. Nothing against Kawamatsu. I love Kawamatsu. But in this regard, Kawamatsu is not the best one to be able to try to get Hiyori food and everything else like that, because, like, at least Kinemon would have been able to, like, disguise himself as someone else to go into town and find a way to get food. Different scabbards would have had different means of being able to try to get food for her and not necessarily stand out. Raizo probably would have stood out. Probably, in all honesty, their best bets would have been Kiku, who could have, like, pretended to, get a job somewhere, just pretend not to be one of the scabbards. Or technically, I guess, Kinemon, but he kind of stands out. But if Izo had been there, Izo would have been a good option too as well, in that regard, to be able to get food. But of course, Toki and Hiyori and Kawamatsu do not have food, or very little food, and any food that they get, Kawamatsu gives to Hiyori. And of course, over those 7 years, it's probably getting to be less and less. And of course, he just pretends that he's, I'm not hungry, I'm fine, doing his kappa dance and everything else like that to try to make her happy. Unfortunately, Hiyori, of course, figures out what happened. She's 6 when all of this starts. 10 years later, she is 13. And she's figured out enough of what is going on. She's like, okay, I can't stay here anymore, or Kawamatsu's just going to literally die of starvation. And I can't do that to him. He is, like, my best friend. He is my guardian. He is this person that I love and I care so much about. I don't want him to die of hunger in this regard. So what Hiyori does is she writes a letter to Kawamatsu that says, I'm going into town to get food because you keep not eating your food. So if I go, then you can now eat. You will have food to eat, so I'm going to go. And, she does not want him to starve to death. So she writes this letter and she runs away. This, of course, leads into when Kawamatsu is searching all over, trying to find her, and then eventually ends up just makes his way to Ringo, where he ends up being in the graveyard, and everything happens there with him and Onimaru, as I went over in his videos. Hiyori, during this time frame, ends up actually making her way into the flower capital, where she ends up being found by 2 of these, either they're geishas or they're oirons themselves, but they're somehow connected, I think, to the Kiyoshiro clan, because by this point in time, Kiyoshiro has already established himself as, one of the Yakuza bosses in the Flower Capital. That Denjiro has disguised himself as Kiyoshiro and has taken up this mantle and everything. So what ends up happening is these two Oiran find Hiyori starving in the street, and, part of the Oiran of the geisha, it's like they were probably well versed in being able to spot if like a young girl would end up possibly growing up to be beautiful or might have a talent or something like that would be good for a geisha or an Oiran, which is essentially what happened. They go over and they get her and they take her over to the Kiyoshiro residence, where Kiyoshiro is like just sitting in his window just smoking his pipe or whatever, and they're like, "Lord Kiyoshiro, we found this girl," and he just looks down and he instantly recognizes her as Hiyori. He's like, "Oh, F, that's not good." Recognizes her as Hiyori. Has no idea where she's been for the past 7 years. He's going to find out in a minute. But, he's going to find out in a hot minute. But, he's like, "Oh, that's Hiyori." And he, hides that he recognizes her, has her brought in, brings her into his office, makes sure there's no one else around while he talks to her. And he takes off his ponytail warmer and reveals that he is Denjiro. And she's just like, just so overwhelmed by this, but so happy to have found someone else. And assumedly what happens is she then explains to him what happened that night in Curry Castle, about everything was on fire, and then Mom sent Momonosuke and the others into the future by 20 years, and then she sent me with Kawamatsu, and we've been that, and he's like, "That's 7 years ago." And she's like, "Yes, and we've been living out in the country and very little food ever since, and it finally got to the point where if I didn't leave, Kawamatsu was going to starve to death, so I had to leave, and I came here." And he's like, "Okay." And like, he doesn't know, this at least tells him that at least at that point in time, Kawamatsu was still alive. So that's at least something. But what ends up happening, and he's like, "Okay." And assumedly he like concocts this plan, pulls this plan out of nowhere. Plan frickin' works. Because, to be fair, he came up with the plan of being Kiyoshiro out of nowhere, too. And that, look how well that paid off for him in the long run. So what he does is he's like, okay, like, figures out what he needs to do. He's like, "Okay, you are no longer going to be called Hiyori. You didn't tell those women your name, did you? No. Okay, you are no longer going to be known as Hiyori. You are going to be known as Komurasaki. And that's going to be your name from now on. I am going to raise you here in this brothel, whatever, and you are going to be trained to eventually become an Oiran, a geisha, whatever variation of it you want to go with. It would be Oiran. Train you to be that. You are going to be the most beautiful, the most charming, the most talented, all this. And you are going to rise through the ranks, and you are going to become this very famous Oiran." And that is what happens over the next 13 years. She is raised in this area. She eventually becomes a geisha, and then she eventually becomes the Oiran and everything. And, she works for the other geishas to learn how to be a geisha and like all this other stuff. She practices her biwa even more. She grows even more and becomes more and more beautiful. And eventually she does, she is now known all over the country as Komurasaki, as this beautiful Oiran. Beautiful, charming, talented Oiran. Just worshipped for her beauty, essentially. And that's where we're going to end this video, because the next one is going to be going over a whole bunch of her time as Komurasaki and all the fun that she gets to have with a lot of very bad men. But during this whole time frame, the only person essentially who knows who she truly is Denjiro, is Kiyoshiro. And eventually Toko comes into the picture here, and I'll go over her in the next video a little bit more in regards to, this section here. But essentially, nobody else knows who she is. That's pretty dang good if she's been able to pretend for the past 13 years. All of that. Good on her for that. Good on Denjiro for coming up with this plan out of nowhere and working with it. So, that's what we have here. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!